let me please start with the general findings of IPCC. We were led by Chris Field, co-chair, and Argentine Vicente Barros, and essentially they gave a really nice environment for academics to actually speak what they wanted to speak and never censure us in any way. So that was a very healthy environment compared to Working Group 3, I'm given to understand. And we are in Working Group 2. So IPCC generally has 4 products in every assessment cycle. Working Group 1 works on the physical science, and we had Professor Fredolin Tangan from UKM doing the physical science. I was in Working Group 2, CLA for Asia, and we worked on adaptation, and Working Group 3 is on mitigation. And the 4th product is actually a synthesis report which will be out in October, and I'm a lead author there, punished by excellence, so they say. Yeah, you keep you end up doing more work if you actually produce good work. And it's also not only in Malaysia but also in international fora. So essentially, this is the take-home message that we want the world to resonate with, that observed impacts of climate change are widespread and consequential. If you remember, the message from AR4 was that climate change is unequivocal. So this is the new message. Observed impacts of climate change are widespread and consequential. We scientists believe in giving big words that nobody can follow us on. That would be part of the explanation for the media block, I believe. And essentially the message is that people, societies, ecosystems around the world are vulnerable and exposed in different ways. And this can be from Africa right up to a very developed nation where Singapore comes to mind, where you have flash floods, where countries never before experienced such things, had to contend with them. And adaptation is already occurring, and these adaptations range from technological solutions right up to ecosystem-based adaptation. And that all around the world you have different forms of adaptation. You may actually be adapting without even realizing that is called adaptation. Like in Southeast Asia, you have adaptation in your development planning. Early warning systems are a form of adaptation. Mangrove reforestation, water resources management. Yeah? And there's an increasing magnitude and warming increase and the likelihood of severe and pervasive impacts. So that's a message coming up, and this, an example is the contrast in precipitation between the wet and the dry regions, and between the wet and the dry seasons, and this contrast is expected to increase. And the effective climate change adaptation is required for a more vibrant world. And this is essentially the problem space where you have issues of climate change and socio-economic processes where natural variability and anthropogenic climate and these various processes affect the hazards, vulnerability and exposure, and risk sits right in the middle. And the solution space would require that anthropogenic climate change be addressed through mitigation, that vulnerability and exposure be reduced in a multitude of ways, that we take risk assessment approaches, that we project new pathways for our development, look into transformation, that we interact adaptation with mitigation in many different ways, and that adaptation is actually context specific, and that is a clear message coming across, and that we improve and strengthen governance systems as a solution. And climate change as we see it now is all about reducing and managing risks. And this is the Asia chapter. Had the pleasure of leading it with colleagues from Japan and China. And I actually have a memory stick that I will leave with ACOM, so you can take copies of the findings of Working Group 1, Working Group 2, Working Group 3, and including these PowerPoints because we want it to be used as much as possible. And we covered 51 countries and regions. And for the first time for the Asia report, we actually divided it by geographic regions rather than climatic regions, so that we could give more guidance to governments. And it was divided into West Asia, Central, Northeast, Southeast and South Asia. And the borders had to be removed because China consistently objected to any borders being shown in any maps. So we had to be innovative about our borders. And in terms of the observed and projected changes, you will see here the trend of temperature, and you will see here the projected temperature. This is what we call the 4-degree world temperature, and a less warmer 2-degree world temperature. The projections indicate that we can expect warmer climates. And if you look at the precipitation here, you will see precipitation changes, varies, but look at Southeast Asia. There's this whole blank area here with no information on for physical parameters. And this one I'm drawing from our first product from Working Group 1 on heat waves, drought and floods, that we have had incidences like this before. It's nothing new. And look at Southeast Asia, no specific observations, just to reflect the paucity of data in this region. And because of this paucity of data, you will see that in terms of future projections, we have increased in precipitation extremes that has been projected, but the projections of regional climate extremes for Southeast Asia is of low confidence. Yeah? So low confidence in any projected change. So if anyone's coming to sell you a technology that they can project climate change, you know it's of low confidence. But what we need more work done on in Malaysia is to actually project on impacts, not on climate anymore. Global science already has told us the story. And with respect to sea level rise, the 5th assessment report has projections that are more near in terms of the 4th assessment report, and with an increase in the confidence level. And you know that global mean sea level will continue to rise in the 21st century, and it will range anywhere from 0.26 to 82 meters. The sea level rise will not be uniform, and within 20% of the global mean levels, and 70% of the coastlines are expected to be affected. And let me just take you through our most innovative product in the IPCC for this time around. Is talking about the level of risk. So what we did was all of us, regions and sectors, looked at risk from present, near term to long term, 2 degrees, 4 degrees. And what we did was we then projected the risk levels and expected for any given, this one you would expect a higher level of risk, and the risk level here is assessed based on the current adaptation. Okay? And what we also did was we reviewed all the available technology and the technologies that are in the pipeline as stated in the literature, and we looked at the risk level with high adaptation. So what you get then in this area, yeah, is your potential for additional adaptation. So essentially your potential for adaptation. So this is the area you would look at the bar going up for any given thing, and you would look at the potential for adaptation. So we did that for chapter Asia, and we looked at the potential for adaptation, and we identified 10 key risks. The first key risk is on increased coastal, riverine and urban flooding, leading to widespread damage to infrastructure and settlements. Nothing new, and the risk level is expected to increase from present term to a 4-degree world. Similarly, what we did look at as an increased risk of heat-related mortality, a high confidence statement. All right. But what you see is, which is very frightening, is that from present term to long term, in a 4-degree world with the current technology and knowledge, we have no way of handling heat-related mortality in a 4-degree world. So what this denotes is that there is a limit to adaptation. Okay, we cannot adapt to everything. And of course, poverty is expected to also increase. And crop failure due to that would lead to food security problems. You will see that in a 4-degree world, current technology, current knowledge, no, there is a limit to adaptation. And water shortage is for arid areas of Asia, something that can be handled. And what I've extracted here is our key conclusion, which resonates with what our first speaker said today. Water scarcity is expected to be a challenge, but it's due to increased water demand and lack of good management. So this is science telling you water management is the issue, not climate change. Yeah? And low confidence in future projections, and the recommendation is for integrated water management strategies to help to adapt. Yeah? So if somebody is telling you that tropical Asia is suffering due to climate change, that's not true. Tropical Asia is suffering due to poor management of water resources. Okay? And this is the coral reef decline situation. Can't do anything in present. Technology may come on board, but nothing to be done in a 4-degree world. And mountaintop extinctions being the two key risks that we have identified related to ecosystems. And this is not to say that there are no additional key risks. This is the only key risk that could be identified based on the current literature. Okay? That doesn't mean there are no key risks, because if you look at the coverage of information we have in the peer-reviewed literature, from North Asia, East Asia, Southeast, South, Central to West Asia, I know it's a little bit difficult to make it out. What you need to see is that the number of crosses there as we go through various sectors: freshwater resources, terrestrial, coastal, food, human settlements, and human health. Look at the number of axes, and the highest amount of data is, of course, in East Asia and South Asia. We have paucity in Southeast, Central, West, and North Asia. So that's not to say there are no key risks that are additional from the 10 that the author team has identified. It's just the fact that there's a paucity of information. So capacity building is really critical, particularly for this country and the region. And it was in this spirit that with Office of the Science Advisor to the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Natural Resources, we are bringing in this Asia-Pacific Climate Change Adaptation Forum, where we will see the practices of over 500 people from Asia and the Pacific, 200 limited to Malaysians. A special channel has been opened through invitation, covering multiple themes, from mainstreaming to public-private partnerships to food and energy nexus. So I'm pleased to say that I've told Pauline we will take 3 registrations from AIDCOM, so that you can have a chance to see what people in Asia and particularly the Pacific, how they are handling their issue on with practical solutions, and just to build the capacity in the country. And one special session is devoted to ASEAN, and we would on day 3, where we want to look at how ASEAN can, particularly the private sector, can be mobilized, how we can mainstream climate change adaptation in the private sector, rather than being something of a corporate social responsibility. You want informed decision making for future security of your investments. Okay? And with that, I thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Professor Joy, for sticking to time. I think a number of take-home messages from her presentation, definitely that first I think worth highlighting is the one bleak picture and one promising one. Start with the big one is the fact that if the world has got to grapple with a 4 degrees increase, it's not within our institutional memory to handle mortality. So that's very important. So this is a situation that we have to collectively as global citizens to come together and try to address this, try to avoid from this possibility of getting near 4 degrees increase. But perhaps there's hope, and there's always opportunity from crisis, is the fact that water scarcity is a challenge in Asia, predominantly because of poor management and not because of well, natural causes. So there is hope there. So if we address our management strategy as well, we may have the ability to deal with the water scarcity issue. Without further ado, I would like to invite our second speaker for today, Ms. Hilary Chu from Third World Network. She's been with Third World Network for a number of years now, but before that we're familiar with her writing in The Star, writing on environmental issues, so she's no stranger in the environmental fraternity in Malaysia. Hilary, you have 20 minutes. Are you ready, Hilary? Yes. While waiting for Hilary, if anyone has one burning question for Professor Joy, we have more time after this for you to reflect on. Mr. Lau Chan, quick one.
Yeah. You mentioned about mortality. Okay, you mentioned about mortality in the 4-degree world, as well as water is limitations. I think as far as human adaptation is concerned, it is possible to accommodate these, but there will be a need for high energy requirements to satisfy these, which again could possibly be done reasonably if sufficient energy efficiency emphasis is taken into account. Is this considered in your deliberations? Thank you.
The conclusion that was drawn on all the available literature from the health sector in particular, as well as all the solutions. So all the literature that is published there has been taken into account to come to that conclusion. And it's a high confidence conclusion. That means there is evidence and there is agreement. So one cannot dispute that, so I'm not going to challenge the literature on that score. Thank you.
Dr. Joy. We may take more questions after Hilary's presentation. We'll have about 20 minutes. Without further ado, the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon. My presentation is going to be quite different from Dr. Joy. It will be pretty much, it may bore you to tears because I'm going to say a lot of things about the negotiation, and then primarily because all the adaptation work that we are seeing now, even the IPCC work, all of them has an origin from the UNFCCC, which is the UN Convention on Climate Change. Okay, so I believe that from this morning you have heard from our Malaysian delegates, Dr. Gary, who has spoke about mitigation and adaptation, and you have an idea what it is all about. So my presentation is on adaptation, which is of course one of the two responses to the problem of climate change. Okay, next slide please. Okay, I'll beg your indulgence to just read through so that you have a very general understanding what adaptation is about. It's about adapting to our ecological, social, and economic systems, right? And it is a very big challenge actually, right? So how do we adapt to all these changes that is taking place in these three big systems that affect our life? Right. Next. Okay, in engaging in adaptation activities, these are the key elements that we have to do. Okay. That's basically what the scientist has done as well. Those agencies, the practitioners of adaptation. These are the steps that you have to observe to make sure that you come up with a very robust assessment of adaptation. Next, please. The question that was asked was, is adaptation a neglected agenda? The short answer is no, it is not neglected at all. Yeah. So you have a lot of agencies or bodies out there that is responding to this situation. So these are just a few of them. The main one, of course, is the negotiation at the UNFCCC. Okay, then the IPCC, which provides the scientific input. Okay, and other UN agencies has also come aboard, and then they have done quite a lot of stuff. These are a few of the agencies, the key ones, and the multilateral development banks as well. They have a lot of programs and initiatives related to adaptation. Okay, next. All right. As I said, I'm going to bore you a bit, but please bear with me. This is what the UNFCCC over the years have done. Okay, LDC stands for Least Developed Countries. So in 2001 at COP7, COP is the Conference of Parties. Usually it happens in the year end, where all the signatories to the UNFCCC will meet, right, and come up with decisions. That year they decided to launch a work program for the LDCs, the least developed countries. That's simply because the least developed country, they are the most vulnerable and they don't have the means to adapt to climate change, so they are the first to be helped. So under the LDC's work program, countries, the least developed countries, are asked to develop their national adaptation program actions, right? And NAPAS, that's what in short we call it, and the LUG is the Least Developed Country Expert Group. So these two were established that year, and there's also a fund, LDC fund, which is under the GEF, which is the funding agencies. And then subsequently, a few years later, then we have the Nairobi Work Program. This was established under SubStar, which is a subsidiary body of scientific and technological advice, which advised the parties on how to go about, drafting or evaluating your adaptation needs. Okay, right. And then there's also the Adaptation Fund, which was launched in 2009. And this Adaptation Fund is actually linked to CDM. All right. Unlike the LDCF, which is under the convention, the Adaptation Fund is under the Kyoto Protocol, and this is a private sector involvement in it. Okay, where under the Kyoto Protocol, developed countries are supposed to cut their emission, and when they cannot do it domestically, they will do it. They will get their credits from developing countries, where developing countries are assisted to also cut their emission, and then from there, the credit, what we call it, the certified emission reduction, will be counted into the developed countries' emission reduction targets. So that's why the CDM is about. That's the Clean Development Mechanism, and then 2% of the money from CDM is actually pumped into Adaptation Fund, okay, which is to help the least developed countries and also other developing countries, right? And then in 2010, there's this big push for adaptation because developing countries realizing that they are really so vulnerable now. So then they got the Cancun, what they call the Cancun Adaptation Framework. That's because in 2010, the COP16 was held in Cancun, Mexico, right? And further work was done on the Cancun Adaptation Framework, and that resulted in the National Adaptation Plan. National Adaptation Plan is actually an evolution from NAPAS, right? So this developed country has done all their NAPAS, but then there's no money, okay? The money from the fund is to do the, to plan and then to assess, to create, to look at what are your adaptation needs and come up with reports. But in actual implementation, you need money, okay? So then there's NAPS that came in, National Adaptation Plans. And also at the same year, there were a lot of discussion about, a work program on loss and damage. Loss and damage is a concept where basically you cannot adapt anymore, okay? Where you have reached a situation, the impact or the effects from climate change is so great that there's no way you can adapt, and you are incurring, you're seeing damages in your systems, your ecological, your social systems, and then you have to calculate what's your damage, and then basically you have to look at, even countries who are sinking, then they have to look at what is the damage and what's the loss, and they might have to migrate and abandon the islands, all right? And then the 2011 in Durban, they launched the working group on the Durban Platform for Enhanced Action. Basically, this is a new round of negotiation for an agreement, for a new agreement, ostensibly by 2015, and then it will come into effect in 2020. So this, if you read in the news and all that, all the negotiation is targeted towards that new agreement now, and that is being worked under this working group in the UNFCCC negotiation. Right, last year in Warsaw, the loss and damage work from the work program, you can see the progression. Work has been done, and then finally it came out with the international mechanism. I'll talk a bit more about the politics of the difficulties of negotiation later on. But this Warsaw International Mechanism was a very, very hard-fought decision from Warsaw. The developing country at one point was threatening to walk out of the negotiation. civil society had walked out because they were so fed up with the negotiation. But of course, parties to the convention, continue to discuss, and finally they resolved the impasse, and that's how Warsaw International Mechanism came about. Okay, next please. Alright, then besides UNFCCC, IPCC has also done quite a lot of work in adaptation, right? In the assessment, the fourth assessment report, they have noted that there's effort on adaptation, and it's necessary to adapt now. There's no doubt anymore, it's unequivocal climate change impacts. But nevertheless, there's barriers, there's limits, and there's cost to it, as I mentioned earlier about finance. You can have a very nice looking adaptation plan and report, but then you need to implement it, because you need to adapt, you need to address the climate change impact, right? And then come AR5, Assessment Report 5, okay? It's a very comprehensive report, as you can see from presentation by Dr. Joy, and that's only just a segment on Asia. If you look at the working group 2, the summary report, and then you look at the underlying scientific input and all that, it is really comprehensive. Okay, then they're also looking at the future risks and opportunities for adaptation across all sectors and regions, right? And then how you should manage your future risks and also build resilience into your development plan. Next, please. Right. I'm thinking that for journalists, maybe it would be very good if you leave this room this afternoon to start to think about, what is all this negotiation about, and why is it so important to us, and why is it so difficult and whatnot. I mean, if you are even thinking about that. Okay, as I highlighted earlier, finance is a key issue here, right? There's a huge shortfall. I'll give you an example what I mean by that. Okay, earlier on I mentioned about the LDC fund, the Adaptation fund, right? You probably heard about the Green Climate Fund as well. Just give me 1 minute. Okay. Right, the NAPAS, the National Adaptation Program Action, so far there are 50 countries have submitted their reports, okay, to UNFCCC. Okay, and 150 projects has been identified, and this will cost US 4.6 billion. Okay, the key areas is agriculture and food production system, right? And others include natural resources management, water resources, and coastal zone management, right? But in reality, I've looked at the calculation, the tabulation of the figures from the Least Developed Country Fund, the Adaptation Fund, as well as the Special Climate Change Fund. SCCF and LDCF is under the Convention, and Adaptation Fund is under the Kyoto Protocol. And the amount that's pledged, only up to, this is very recent figure, up to first quarter of this year, okay, comes up to only US $1.6 billion. And the amount, this is amount pledge, okay? And the amount pledge, as I said just now about the CDM, which is actually the from the market, right? That contribute 190 million to the 1.6 billion, okay? But that's amount pledge, right? So the amount approved up to April this year is 1.2 billion, okay? As I said earlier, the NAPAS alone, 150 projects, you require 4.6 billion, okay? And these are only for least developed countries. We are not talking about the non-LDCs, yeah, that also are increasingly facing the impacts and realizing that they need money to adapt. Okay. Capacity data, as Dr. Joy has highlighted, from Southeast Asia, basically we don't have much data, and therefore that put us at a very disadvantaged situation as well, in terms of asking for funding. And in terms of negotiation, because the country that are supposed to pay will say that you have nothing to show that you are vulnerable, okay? And Southeast Asia being not LDCs, not many of us are LDCs. Laos is LDC, then Burma is, Myanmar is LDCs, but then we are very vulnerable, but we cannot prove that we are vulnerable to them. So that put us at a very disadvantage, okay? And also, many of these countries in Asia, we find that I mean, you are a journalist in Malaysia, you probably know that our policies, there's a lot of incoherence. So that is also a big hindrance for us when it comes to adapting to climate change. Okay? And we don't have enabling institutional framework. You know? Our institutions are so fragmented, yeah? And institution A doesn't know what agency B is doing, or they may be doing overlapping work, and or they may be doing work that is going to compromise what the other is doing. Okay? So that's a big challenge for us. And awareness as well, right? I would say that Malaysian, generally the awareness is very low. Right? They probably know that yes, island is sinking, but they don't know that, you know, the rain that they are experiencing now, the unusual rainfall they are experiencing now, is also have something to do with climate change. But we don't have the data, as we say. You know. And technology. Well, domestically, I think skill-wise, knowledge-wise, we have big issue with that. And then at the international level also, if you look at like water management technology, we're talking about the big ones, how to address sea level rise, right? Most likely these technologies are patented, and if we were to buy this technology, we're going to spend a lot. And again, everything is, you can see, you know, the cycle, it ties back to finance again. And there's also the challenge of false solution, okay? For example, in terms of climate agriculture, how do you adapt to agriculture? You have companies or corporations, they are trying to sell you this solution like climate smart agriculture. Okay? Very big sounding words. There is always danger lurking behind it. Not just in terms of patent, but also these technologies may not give you the solution, and it may actually make the situation worse. And then, of course, in terms of the negotiation, this big fight at the COP every year, and every session of the meeting of UNFCCC is the convention, the integrity of the convention is being challenged. And why is it important for us that we have to defend this convention? Because convention, all these articles are the one that clearly spell out whose responsibility is this, and who has to bear more, who has to shoulder the responsibility, right? I'll just quickly read out one or two conventions that will probably help trigger some thinking. All right. For example, Article 3.1. The parties should protect the climate system for the benefit of present and future generations of humankind on the basis of equity and in accordance with their common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities. I believe Dr. Gary would have said these four-letter words this morning, CBTR. It's a four-letter word in UNFCCC negotiation because countries that has brought us this climate change problem are refusing to own up to their responsibility now. And that will have an impact on them giving us the technology and giving us the money. Okay? Alright, and then Article 4.3, this is related to adaptation. It commits developed country parties to provide new and additional financial resources, including for mitigation, adaptation, and technology transfer activities. And it further commits parties from, in Article 4.4, it says to assist the developing country parties that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effect of climate change, emitting costs of adaptation to those adverse effects. Right? And Article 4.7. The extent to which developing country parties will effectively implement their commitments under the Convention will depend on the effective implementation by developed country parties of their commitments under the Convention related to financial resources and transfer of technology, and will take fully into account that economic and social development and poverty eradication are the first and overriding priorities of the developing country parties. So Asia, most of us are developing countries except for Japan and South Korea who are OECD, and of course Singapore, they don't really want to admit that they are a developed country, but they are a developed country. Okay. So we are, the convention is actually our lifeline the way I look at it. You know? If we lost all these things in the convention, this article, and if it's eroded, and hence some of you, it may make you realize that why the negotiation is so difficult is because the convention holds certain parties responsible, and these parties do not want to own up to their responsibilities now. They want to escape from their responsibilities, and The developing countries are very divided. G77 and China is a huge group of 130 over countries, and we have all very different challenges, different needs, and at the negotiation we oftentimes do not stand united, and that is a huge challenge. And I think this is something that the journalists in developing countries have to take note of, and whenever you write about climate change, you have to bear this in mind, that it's not just about environmental issue, it's about economy, it's about survival of the country as well. Okay.